Thank you for joining me today for another episode of the Healthy AF podcast. With me is Karim Chubin, who is a Swiss-trained naturopath who found really a new, in his own search for healing, a device or a mechanism called IHT that transformed his perception or his concept of healing. And he's going to share with us that concept today. Karim, thank you for joining me. We're going to unpack this a little bit more. I left it a little mysterious, but I want to allow you to unpack it for our audience. But thank you for taking the time to join me here from Switzerland.
Zane, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be your guest and to be able to speak about this passionate theme, which is IHT from not the Siberian pristine highlands or any other mountains in Colorado, but actually from the Swiss mountains, where in this refuge where I'm actually spending a few days with a gentleman who's 101 years old, who's hosting me. So I'm learning a lot about his mindset and his approach to health span and lifespan. And one thing that I'm going to be actually speaking to him tomorrow and recording something short about him. One thing that I learned yesterday, I said, but please just give me a few nuggets on how come. I mean, he said, look, he's constantly training his mind, learning new things, has the old glass of red wine, moves around the house, around the garden, builds things, and he's constantly pushing himself outside of his comfort zone or expanding his comfort zone. So I think that's really a lesson. And he eats a bit of everything, but he eats small portions.
Wow.
That's just an introduction. So a few words about myself. So I'm a Swiss-born and trained naturopath and nutritionist, born to Persian parents, Iranian parents, and I became a naturopath in 2004, opened a boutique practice initially in Paris and Switzerland, and then quickly realized that I did not believe that helping patients and people thrive would require me to see 6 to 8 people a day. So the model I developed was a boutique practice where I would take patients on journeys in 2, 4, 6 month sequences and accompany them. I'd bring in chefs to train their chefs. So I was really basing the crux of the heart of my practice on the nutrition of emotions. I quickly understood that people who were not seriously ill, but who were looking to improve health span or who were suboptimal or looking to improve the quality of health or to address certain, symptoms through nutrition, supplementation, and lifestyle changes were not really willing to make all those changes. So they were quite lazy and they were toying with it. So I realized one of the hardest things was to get them, and you know this as well as I do, and many people out there, was to get them to actually change their emotional output and their relationship to food. So I found a way through aromatherapy, internally, herbal medicine, nutritional medicine, and lifestyle medicine, of creating synergies whereby people would take about 10, 12, 13 supplements a day. So I was criticized for the number of supplements, but when they actually eventually took them, then there was a shift that happened in emotional output and therefore in taste buds. So the transition to a new lifestyle became more seamless. All that worked pretty well. It brought me to the Middle East. I worked in Saudi Arabia, served a prince. All that sounds very glorious, but the truth is that I only got, to my mind's eye, I'm being a perfectionist. I got very good results, but I got a lot also of people who were, to my mind's eye, not taking this seriously enough. At least in Europe, maybe in the US, it's different. So and then in parallel to that, I developed a fascination during my teenage years for the Russian culture, language, and literature, and actually for the Siberian traditional healing traditions. And I went to Russia, St. Petersburg, learned Russian in my 20s, actually at the age of 20, and then have traveled there regularly and have managed to develop very close relationships with healers, scientists. So I go backwards and forwards, and I'm going to actually in a couple of days to Russia, then to Siberia, to learn and to constantly stay abreast of the latest discoveries in Siberian healing traditions, let's put it this way, which are often very much entrenched in science, and as some of us know, have given birth to what we call in the West bioresonance, which essentially comes from the former Soviet Union and the research in the space programs for astronauts. So all this, all this to mention that I had this boutique practice all the way from 2005 to 2021, when in March of 2021, on the 19th of March, I was out in Moscow, in Russia, actually, and I was going through a transition in my personal life, going through a personal breakup with my girlfriend at the time. So I was in a state of sorrow. I was sad. My immune system was weak. I was taking a handful of supplements. I thought I was healthy because I was generally quite healthy. And The COVID went straight to me. I came back to Geneva, back to Switzerland. My life turned. I lost 7 kilos, didn't leave my flat for 2 months. Started developing all sorts of phobias of vis-a-vis bed bugs. I mean, seeing bed bugs everywhere. It's actually no one could come to my place. And I became very isolated, and my lungs were hit. My lungs were hit really badly. The approach in Switzerland was a watch and see approach to the COVID. And I was blessed, still am, to have a very dear pharmacist friend of mine who owns 2 astonishing pharmacies of integrative medicine in Geneva and a compounding lab. And she supported me and supplied me with every possible supplement and IVs that I could, put my hands on. And to be honest, Zane, nothing worked. And my lungs were more and more affected. And my ex-girlfriend at the time actually told me, look, there's this doctor in Russia who's helping many people who are not well. And this was during the Delta form in March of 2021. And I speak to this lady, she has my coffee. She said, you need to stop everything and you need to take, high dose cortisone. I'm going to stop the storm. So I figured, I may as well try, I have to be open-minded because natural medicine wasn't working. And that's why I saw the limits of my art. So I went and I was given 16 milligrams of dexamethasone, and I actually stopped. The next day I woke up, my bed was soaking wet, and I realized I was going to live. I was actually, all of a sudden, I felt that I was taken over by a spiritual force, an exogenous force that was going after my lungs like a sniper. And I was quite defenseless. And it was quite scary. But I'm I'm a survivor and I adapt, but it was just odd because you're alone, you're isolated, you're losing bone mass, muscle mass, listen to classical music and coughing, and you realize it's not going, and the temperature was high. And so I take the dexamethasone, it stops, and then another sort of dark chapter begins. First of all, a beautiful chapter begins. I'm totally stress-free. I'm in a bubble. Of course, the effects of cortisone, I'm totally detached. And then 1 week gradually weaned me off the cortisone. Bam, I start crying in the middle of the day. I start getting worried about my work, and things, random thoughts would make me very emotional. And then I thought, this is really odd. So to cut a long story short, a couple months later, I woke out of my flat and my brain was interpreting seasons differently. This is May. I invited 2 of my close friends. I had them, sit on towels. They thought I was completely nuts. And I walked out to get some fresh air and I wore one of my winter jackets. I said, Karim, it's May. My brain was working against the season. I thought it was the winter. I was in the winter. And then I just secured actually a consultancy for a chain of fitnesses and spa, a very famous chain in Russia known as World Class. And I didn't believe in naturopathy anymore, but I thought, well, look, I want to go back and, try. Maybe I'll enjoy it again, especially in Russia, the challenge of doing this in a foreign language. So I went to Russia a week and let me go back one step. I was researching how I could regenerate my lungs and I can get out of my depression and my lack of vitality. I didn't want to take a supplement. I was through with it. I looked at all my supplements there. I wasn't touching any. No IVs anymore, no glutathione, no vitamin C. That's essentially what I was doing. And I saw that in Israel and in Russia, they were doing some work with HBOT and oxygenation. So I went to Russia, to a center for athletes, and a couple of sessions of hyperbaric, and I actually felt better. And then I went to southern Russia, to this absolutely mind-boggling clinic founded by the current prime minister for his wife, who's a physician, who's a plastic surgeon. It's a holistic clinic, several floors, several story building. And they actually have now 3 or 4 in Russia. And I walked in and said, excuse me, have you got a hyperbaric chamber? They said, yes, we do. But young man, just hold on 1 second. We have something more powerful than that. And I said, what is it? They said, it's known as IHT or IHHT. I said, what does that stand for? Interval hypoxic training or interval hypoxic hyperoxic training. I said, well, what does that do? So you don't have to lie in a chamber. You keep your clothes on. You lie down. You wear a mask. And we take you from sea levels all the way up to the mountains to several thousand meters, up to 6,500 meters. We stress your body, but only so temporarily. We keep you up in the mountains for a few minutes. We reduce the oxygen content. So we change the oxygen to nitrogen ratio. We keep you up in the mountain, and then we drop you down by the sea. And we take you up and we bring you down. So we create that ebb and flow. I say, hold on, what is that going to look like? So you're just going to lie down and rest. Try to fall asleep, and we're going to be activating your parasympathetic system. So they spoke to me in a language that I could understand. I mean, a simple language, but also professional. So I said, okay. I said, and preferably please switch your phone off and try to rest. I did it once, and not on the day when I did the hyperbaric chamber. I did it once, and My ex-girlfriend at the time, who actually slept next to me that evening, told me, "You did not snore last night." Really? And I had sleep apnea. And I knew it, but I wasn't using any CPAP. Okay. Tried it a second time the next day. And she confirmed, you didn't snore last night. And I noticed that I woke up with more energy, more vitality. And I could sense, having quite a fine intuition, that I was onto something. So between the hyperbarics that I did twice for 2 days, and then the IHG, that I did for another 2 days, I figured maybe this is, a path that's worth exploring. So I changed my return flights to Switzerland, and I spent 10 days in Russia. And they said, well, ideally you do this every other day. So I'm sorry, I don't have the time. I have work back home. So, okay, well, then do it every day. So I went to the Moscow branch, a smaller clinic, and I spent every day on an empty stomach, and I breathed for 40. And I went back to Switzerland for 3 weeks, came back to Russia to continue the consultancy. I saw a few patients over a couple of days. It was just, I was going very gently. And I remember that after day 2, so after 14 sessions, 14 sessions in total, I looked at the swimming pools, I swim, and there was a 25-meter pool. I swam, did some crawl, then I went underwater 25 meters, then I butterflied, then I went underwater, something like that. And I stopped. I came out, I called my guardian angel and talked to my pharmacist and said, look, what's going on? And she said, well, you're onto something. I said, this is somebody. A, I have the vital force to do it. B, I have the pulmonary capacity. I'm not tired, and I feel I can continue. So I hadn't, done any. I just stopped. I didn't have the willingness, the wish, the energy. I was somehow still lethargic inside, and I didn't believe in my abilities anymore. And once I realized that, she said, try to find out where you can continue this in Europe. So I asked the Russians. I said, well, what is this? I said, well, look, let me explain to you. And this was very beautiful. Actually, let me go back one step. When I discovered this in southern Russia, I was given a lecture by the head doctor, Andrei, who said, look, young man, supplement, what you do as a naturopath is nice and dandy. Let me explain to you and give you a class on the mitochondria. So he gave me a whole class on the mitochondria. I listened to him. It was music to my ears. But he explained to me, you don't need as many supplements if you change your terrain, which made complete sense to me because it spoke to the naturopath. He said, if you change the powerhouse inside the cells, if you produce more ATP, you're going to automatically have more vital force. And as you know, young man, as you get older, there's more and more rust. There's more and more inflammation. Enzymes switch off, which can actually be reactivated. More and more stresses occur. More and more hormones are depleted. More and more nutrients are poorly absorbed. More and more of us have, a leaky gut, leaky brain, etc. So more and more systems gradually go down and start being less functional, more problematic, more erratic. Our role as practitioners is through, if we deploy, this is him speaking to me, a truly regenerative outlook, is to work upstream on giving the body what it needs to change and then to become more intelligent, more pliable, more able to absorb and utilize nutrients, etc., and convert into ATP. Of course, it makes complete sense to me. It brought me back to my science days, and I thought, okay, naturopathic days, and I thought, okay, this makes sense. And then when I lived it, I realized, well, this is very intriguing. Here I am breathing, eating less, and it's something very interesting. When I was breathing those 10 days, I was also consulting. So I was, but not much, but I was able to go without food for 20 hours, just on herbal teas, without having any insulin dips. And being hyperactive, I do generally need protein, fats. I have a way of eating. And here I was able to actually go through my day, and only that, have more restorative sleep. And this is without a CPAP. So I realized one of them, my sleep is improving, I have more vital force, I have less appetite, I have very good focus. I was feeling that inside something was shifting. Where I felt, the COVID was coming after me, I felt that something was changing. And I asked them, where can I continue this? I'm moving forward again. They said, Berlin, Germany. The Germans have learned from us, actually. 2 Russian doctors moved there in the 90s and have actually spread the gospel and have been educating, Europe, essentially in German, about the virtues of IHHT. So I went to Berlin. I was actually put in touch with a gentleman who became my teacher and a good friend of mine in Berlin. And I went, met him, appreciated him, continued speaking to him on a as colleagues, and then say, look, can I get a device, and I'll start for home use in Switzerland and continue. So I got a device, leased it for 9 months, and then started experimenting with, and this is how my concept began, with frequency medicine. So music, I love music, especially classical music, but also jazz. So I was noticing that my breathing and my sessions were different when I was combining the interval hypoxic training with specific, vibrations and therefore music. That those 45/50 minutes spent breathing was spent every, so my parasympathetic was activated. And I was sharing the results with this gentleman who was commenting them, and we were noticing, very, very clear differences between breathing on its own as a standalone and breathing with music. Then one thing led to the next, and I thought, okay, well, why don't I actually create a concept and go back to what I used to do, but do it differently, and help people in need, with or without the COVID, but people who have poor mitochondria, but don't know about it because most of the testing not accurate today, and the blood testing could show good mitochondria when you don't feel well, or bad mitochondria when you feel great. So we're not there yet. Let's be honest about it. So with the indirect ways of testing, and I thought, okay, well, why not create a concept in Russia, which would become the iteration of a fitness of the future, a lounge where people would come in, breathe with music, and essentially learn to train while they rest. And that is really the slogan. So it's not training in a high altitude, it's living in high altitude, but training low. So in other words, encouraging us in the West to activate that parasympathetic. And actually, it's counterintuitive to think that you can actually train whilst relaxing, whilst being lazy in bed, or without it.
Especially in the US.
Especially in the US. No, especially in the US, but also in the UK. And unfortunately, it's become but it's true that in the US, I've noticed that it's quite prevalent. So I played around with that device. And when I was really convinced, and really the giveaway was friends of mine who were very much into Wim Hof. We went, to the Lake Geneva in the winter, and they were, and they trained, and they said, come on, let's swim. I said, sure, but I don't do Wim Hof. I went in, came out, and they were freezing when they came out. And we're talking about February, 3 or 4 Celsius, quite cold.
Yes.
And I come out, and I'm actually not feeling them. Of course, I actually put my head underwater. They told me, that's insane. I said, no, it isn't. I said, but how come? And then I realized that all the IHHT that I was doing was actually making me metabolically more adaptable, let's put it this way. So I came out, and they were really intrigued. And then I thought, okay, well, why don't I go back to Russia, to Moscow, and build a concept to thank Russia for the COVID, for the cortisone, and for the IHH. But bring a concept, or create a concept which would be a wellness-based concept, not a strictly speaking a medical one, because in Russia it is still very medical. And then the politics in the world changed, as we know, a few years ago, and I decided against that and decided to build something in Switzerland, which I would then export. And this is what I did. About a year and a half ago, I created a Longevity, which is my Swiss brand, with my associate. Thank you. Yeah, to play a word between longevity and the lounge. And the whole idea being that people could discover an oasis of tranquility where they would train whilst they rest, where they would receive, of course, IHHT, so mitochondrial medicine, frequency medicine, or vibrational medicine through music. And then the experience, it's an experience. A weighted blanket, 2 different weights, and also for kids and during the spring and summer, so 6 kilo or 9 kilo blanket, organic cotton. They're not lying horizontally, which was the mistake in Russia, when you could fall asleep, tongue can go back and you can panic. Right. So you're actually in a lounging position. Music and a bit of aromatherapy on a handkerchief to begin with to activate certain senses. And then they're left to their own devices. They switch their phone off and they check in their phones when they come in. There is no cell phone. There is no music that they listen to on their phones. We curate the music. We recommend the music. So the entire experience is curated by us. There's a questionnaire before they start and a questionnaire after about 15 sessions. And people come 2 to 3 times a week initially. That's the commitment to get results. 3 is ideal every other day. 2 is perfectly acceptable. Less, we just don't even begin. And they do this for 10 to 15 sessions. And generally what happens after that is most people end up, purchasing or leasing it. So after about 9 months, when I was convinced, I researched the field even more, and I discovered there were a few players in Germany, and I went to the oldest, and to my mind's eye, the most reliable manufacturer. And I went to them, because they don't use any Bluetooth, any Wi-Fi, and they only manufacture. They're not a marketing company. They do that and they have a capacity to grow. And they have different distributors in different countries. So I went up to them and said, look, I'm developing a concept in Geneva, which I want to export. And then having ties to North America and some family in New York, and having also received many of my trainings after naturopathic school in the States, and namely in Oregon, I was interested to bring this to the US, and they said, we have no one. So I became the exclusive distributor for North America and Canada, and I've just started a few months ago exhibiting this in trade shows. And essentially, the project and vision right now is to establish my initial nexus in Miami, my base at the Sentinel Wellness, where I would be beautifully welcomed by the team, by the founder, by Layla, and to offer brick and mortar experiences initially in Miami, and then hopefully in different states in America, but also to offer people the possibility of receiving and owning the experience at home by purchasing and leasing the device and the experience with the music, and making the experience luxurious, but the price affordable. So that really is the vision, so people can understand the cardinal importance of discovering and replenishing and rejuvenating the mitochondria, because most of us, have difficulty understanding this the mitochondria is mysterious because we were mentioning about it earlier, people have more facility visualizing a vertical axis, the gut-the-brain. Even the gut-the-brain and the immune becomes a little bit harder to visualize. We think vertically, but to think in terms of an axis which is diffuse and which is present in every cell. We inherit from our moms the mitochondria exclusively, which are ancient bacteria that have mysteriously co-evolved with us. And some would argue that they're the hosts and we're the guests. So our human arrogance needs to somehow be, and our ego put to one side and understand that it's an encounter. And the beauty in naturopathy is we understand that there is no winner in an open war, even in a cold war. There is no winner. There's much more to be gained in deploying an approach like in Tai Chi or in Aikido. In other words, in understanding that we have to live with parasites. We have to live with unwanted guests. We have to live with stresses. The whole question is, how metabolically pliable, elastic, adaptable are we? How are we able to cope with the different influxes of stress, emotional, ecological, electromagnetic, dietary, human? And I think that this is, for a long time we were thinking, as we know, in isolated ways. And then we started regrouping it on axis. And now we're realizing the importance of what we call the mind, but the importance of music. We know that cells speak to one another the way musical notes do. And that's what we know from the research on plants, that depending on whether we play the Mozart, or techno music, or on water, Emoto's work, it's all going to be very different. Hence the importance of self-love, of love, of community, of laughter. And these are things that are so important. That's why the experience at longevity is really for people to walk in and feel comfortable from the moment they walk in, not ill as I did in Russia, which I was, but the experience is very dry. And also people are then offered special herbal teas on the way out. So there's a real cocooning. Another important point about the vision and what we're developing in the US is, as I mentioned, to have this brick and mortar experience, offer longevity at home, but also, and this is going to happen a little bit later, but hopefully quite soon, which is to have these longevity breathing lounges offered in corporate settings. We have fitnesses, in various buildings and all over the place. Now, the idea is when people say, but hold on, can I train with a mask on? No. This is not about training in high altitude and pushing yourself even further and stressing and sweating. But on the contrary, it's about learning to take, it's counterintuitive, we said, counterintuitive, but it's about offering yourself that parenthesis, that break, that window where you reconnect to yourself, but you train and you offer that, and during that window, you get a mitochondrial, you reignite your mitochondria. So by doing that, you're actually working, and this is now we're reaching the nuts and bolts of this one. You're working upstream on activating mesenchymal stem cells, which are non-differentiated. So what happens is the body, being a very intelligent, self-regulating organism. In other words, you give it the right influx, be it food, be it emotion, be it all of the above. The body has an innate intelligence to self-regulate and repair. It doesn't need, and that's what the beauty of adaptogenic remedies. And the
Mm.
research the Soviets did on the Siberian, Eleuterococcus or, Rhodiola rosea and others, is that they realized that rather than focus on specific glands, why not work upstream on the hypothalamus and balance the entire HPT axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid axis, by giving non-specific herbs that speak to the head of the orchestra, who will then downstream speak to all the glands, allowing for better, a more balanced hormonal output. It doesn't mean that we don't need specific herbs, specific organs, but I'm saying if we are to be truly holistic in our approach, and coming from a vitalistic school, we realize that we need energy or vitality to detoxify. And that also comes from a healthy HPT axis, but definitely comes from better mitochondria. That's why so many people who go on different fasts don't do well in water fasts. Others do really well. It all depends on, their metabolic and their mitochondrial health. And most of us don't know about it. We only know after the fact. Right. So the idea is to change the way we think about our health, and start with the mitochondria. So if we are to summarize what I just said here is start with the mitochondria, meet your mitochondria, feed your mitochondria, and be gentle on yourself. To learn to activate that parasympathetic, to learn to bring in, the way mindfulness has taken, the world as a storm and people are now understanding in the last, decade. Well, why not start including more music and working on your soul the way we work on, learning new languages, learning new words, training ourselves, getting new degrees, but learning not to be competitive. And I speak now very much so to a North American public with ourselves and our spouses and our, and society but to maybe take on a little bit more from the French culture and from the Latin countries, which is essentially a philosophy of life, of being a bon vivant. Why couldn't America start including, we in North America, I say we because I'm going to be transitioning to the US, to bring this project. Why not learn that we can be extremely efficient? Actually, the French have proven to be very efficient in their 40-hour week, despite their long lunches, because it really is about being able to hyper-focus. And I think that what's happening in a huge continent like America of extremes is that we go from one extreme to another and we tend to lose the center. And I'm offering to reignite the mitochondria, which will in turn feed our body's intelligence and maybe require us to take less. Hence the mantra less is more, fewer supplements, maybe work less in terms of hours, but more efficiently. Open windows where we include art into our lives and, and emotional intelligence, things that hopefully AI won't be able to replace too quickly. And because at the end of the day, it's a very mysterious journey. It's a very transient journey. And all of this we leave here when we go. So it's the quality of life can also be measured by the quality of our friends, quality, of the food we eat, the soils, the foods are grown on, quality of the community that we have, the community of the. So I'm moving a little bit outside of the topic, but I really think that what I learned when I transitioned to a new state of health a few years ago is that I could look at my 9 bottles here, maybe take 3 of them. So it's a security blanket, travel with supplements, but I only take a handful of my selection. Whereas before 2021, I used to swallow everything with my eyes closed, believing blindly that I was essentially feeding a void. I'm not saying that supplements are useful, but they need to be metabolized. And as one gentleman once said, it's not that we are what we eat, we are what we're able to metabolize. Or another thing, we're as healthy as, as the quality of our trees. And one of the things we don't see, the mitochondria, the arteries, we only know it, when it's often too late, unless we, do some testing in advance. But even when we do the testing in advance, the truth is, how many supplements are we really ready to take on board? But if we make those lifestyle changes upstream, and lifestyle doesn't just mean doing more sports and lifting weights, which are important, and you know this much better than I do, but it's also, I think, really accepting the importance of not only energy, but energy in terms of bringing the less tangible elements, which is, as I was saying, the community, the laughter, bringing that into the day, into the week, into the weekends. These things are really, really important. And that way we can truly, this way every effort goes further with maybe less extremes, fewer extremes. in anything, be it food, be it supplements, be it even the training. What I find interesting with HHT is that I go through phases where I breathe every other day, then I stop for about a month, then I start again. And it's very interesting to have these breaks. But a new inner compass is born. That's also when the mitochondria shift, not only are you directed to new foods, a new combination of foods, but the ratios change. You start eating less of certain things and more of other things. And it's very hard for me to actually put my finger on it. But generally what patients tell me across the board is we eat less, we feel more vital, we have less brain fog, our taste buds have changed. We don't want sweet foods as much. We recuperate at the gym faster. Our muscle definition has changed. We lose weight. In Germany, it's one of the main tools for insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, and anxiety. I think the whole long COVID area, which is what is long COVID? It's an array of different metabolic, but essentially mitochondrial errors. And this is what I found very interesting with HHT is the Soviets had understood 50 years ago with the research on pilots and then on the athletes that they prepared for the 1968 Olympic Games in Seoul, in Korea. Sorry, in Mexico. The 1968 Mexico Olympic Games, almost all the gold medals were won by the Soviets. And at the time they were using HHT, the better form.
That far back.
Yes, that far back. Oh, no. We're talking about that far back. Remember the notion of the ancient future. We think that we've discovered something since 2019, since the Nobel Prizes of Medicine. I mean, it's the amusing arrogance of the West. We think that we discover, but we essentially confirm through a new vernacular things that ancients have understood, be it, in Persia, be it in ancient India, the Vedic tradition, be it in ancient China, in Egypt, or be it, in the former Soviet Union. A lot of this research is like the research on scalar energy was developed, has been in the process of developing for the last 3 or 4 decades. I mean, the technology that I'm exposed to when I go to Russia is mind-boggling. It's actually very hard to filter, because a lot of what's offered is also very dry in Italian. It's not beautifully done like in the US where it's commercially and visually attractive for the end user, the practitioner, or the patient. It's very dry. It's essentially done for research purposes. But it is really quite extraordinary. And it's extraordinary to see the impact. It's extraordinary when I travel there to see how doctors and physicians and physicists work together, how doctors are researchers, how Big Pharma has absolutely no take on the way people think. And this whole neuro, I like this word, but let's say this health enthusiast, which we call, biohacking is essentially a movement that I've seen in Russia for the past 15 years, where people are, actively partaking in building their health and essentially putting everything into perception, into things through a different viewfinder, evaluating it, not taking anything that's been told by a practitioner or doctor for gospel. So they challenge you, which is actually exciting intellectually. So it's an ebb and flow.
Wow, that's refreshing.
My apologies. Sorry.
That would be refreshing.
But that was very interesting for us, and I made it one of my life missions to whisper, or to take information from the former Soviet Union, to whisper it to Western Europe and vice versa. That's why I created this young podcast called The Million Minds Mission, where I'd like to invite you to speak. It's very young, but it's essentially taking life stories and sharing them. Because this is health information needs to travel across borders, not just in an Anglo-Saxon or French-speaking or Italian environment. It needs to get out of the West to other parts. And I love that, speaking several languages and loving to actually get things from there, because Russians and Soviets are extremely talented, but don't really know how to sell themselves and sell their message or convey it. And I want to be able to.
Well, peptides and bioregulators that came out of Russian technology. I mean, that's like just now the U.S. is still embracing and fighting at the same time.
I know
this technology that's been around since, or gave them that same advantage in the Olympics that you mentioned, and with their soldiers and their
because they look. It's always 3 groups. Exactly. Yeah. Elite military, elite athlete, astronaut.
Yeah.
And the outlook has been regenerative since after World War II, because what the Soviets quickly understood at the time, and the Russians still understood, is you're better off working along the lines of supporting, enhancing adaptation. So allostasis, adaptation in the face of change, which then brings about homeostasis. So hence the adaptogen. not amphetamines, not boosting, not short-term performance. No, quite on the contrary, we're looking at it long-term, and it's terrain medicine.
Yeah.
That's why a conventional allopath in Russia, who might, believe in, let's say, a therapeutic arsenal that I don't believe in, instinctively, will have the intellectual elasticity and intelligence to accept that there are other ways of skinning the cat. So they're integrative now. And what the COVID taught me is that I was saved with cortisone. So what happened actually was that I stopped believing, and I still don't believe, in a divide between, let's say, alternative medicines and post-World War II allopathic symptom-based medicine. I believe there's a situation, and in that situation, an honest practitioner, be he or she an MD or not, or a holistic practitioner, has to have the humility, intellectual and from the soul, to actually that's all we do, a toolbox,
right,
the most appropriate tools at that given moment in time. In my case, let's be honest about it, nothing worked. Cortisone saved me. Maybe ivermectin would have, maybe not. I don't know. I didn't know about it then. And we didn't in Switzerland. The idea is that, so I owe my life to cortisone, but the side effects that came with it, but I also owe part of that demise and the lack of quality that followed to, well, maybe to poor mitochondria and the side effects of the cortisone. Who knows? It's complex. But this is where it's, so we have to have the humility to offer that toolbox that we believe in, and then the patient receives it with his or her belief system. So I was ready to take cortisone there because nothing. So that's what I realized. And that's why I think it's a very interesting learning curve. So IHHE works the way an adaptogen does. It activates upstream mesenchymal stem cells. It then speaks to the mitochondria. It's essentially a reboot of the powerhouses in every cell, in every body, regardless of sex, gender, race. And that's what's interesting. And as the mitochondria clean up, detoxification improves, cellular detoxification, not heroic detoxification in 10 days, ongoing detoxification. So it's really, truly regenerative in its outlook, in its effect, and it truly is holistic medicine. And I like to coin it terrain medicine. Because we know when the terrain changes, everything changes. It works on different biomes. So it also works, as I told you, the link between the mitochondria, the hormones are coming out, more and more research. There are more than 900 studies on it, ranging from dementia, Parkinson, Alzheimer's, the whole neurodegenerative axis. There's research on its effects on melatonin. So as we know, melatonin works on the pineal gland, and therefore downstream as a very powerful antioxidant, work on insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. There's almost no research on cancer. That's very, very young. There's empirical studies out of Germany, but then I think the first study is coming out of Russia right now. So it's very young. And there are, of course, counterindications, but very few. The first trimester of pregnancy, some of us, such as myself, exclude the 9 months of pregnancy for various reasons. Active cancer, acute infections, acute fevers, headaches, the acute worsening of a chronic condition, a congenital intolerance to hypoxia, psychiatric emergencies, and any medical condition that will require a treatment in an intensive care unit. So there's only very a handful. And of course, people who don't, who are scared. You have to respect their belief system. But it can actually be done. It can be done on kids. I've had people we know with autism come to me, children in Geneva, and I would hold their hands for about 10 or 15 minutes, make it a shorter session. They'd feel better. And it has a very tangible effect. And that's what you and I share common passion on sleep. And coming back to my sleep apnea. So I have been using IHG for the past 3.5 years, since July of 2021. And I have been using a CPAP for the past 2 years, so since February of 2022. So I spent about a bit more than a year, 15 months just with IHHD. I went and did the 5th polysomnography, spent a night, did a sleep study, and the quality of my different phases of sleep had improved dramatically, objectively. So, the doctors were very intrigued. I told them, well, sure, this is what I'm doing. But it did not fix the apnea in my case. I was having 40 events per hour when I used to drink wine. Also something, and then 30 events when I gave up wine after the COVID. I stopped all alcohol because that's one of the gifts of the COVID. I lost interest in alcohol altogether. Wow. But again, it's not dogmatic. If I want to, I'll have it. But when I look at a glass, I'll smell it. I'll remember past memories, but there's almost a disconnect from that previous chapter. So for now, it doesn't. Yeah. You see, the way the COVID worked essentially by creating a very, very severe imbalance in mitochondria, and most people perhaps had better mitochondria than they thought, and it was a walk in the park. Others had weaker mitochondria than they thought, and it wasn't that much a weaker. And others had no visible signs and collapse,
Right.
although it was, only a handful, but still, it affected us in different ways because we have different mitochondria and different biomes. We know now that long COVID is very much connected to the gut microbiome, but it's not just that's why, at least I believe, that when you come in with IHHD, you see, and this is what's really exciting, people with weak areas of their health, energy, depression, which is one thing that I've suffered from over the years with my hyperactivity and my emotional ebbs and flows, without using any conventional medication. Since using IHHD and then using a sleep app and addressing sleep upstream through night oxygenation, depression has vanished completely. There are no more signs of depression throughout. And that is really fascinating. I can have the occasional blues, but I have also slept maybe 5 or 6 nights in 2 years without a CPAP, because I was without a CPAP that night and I wasn't at home. And the next day is tough. And it's not self-suggested. It really, really is a different start of the day. Also, you remember the life you had before. And that's interesting. You realize that, 1 second, maybe that low thyroid in the morning and that brain fog and the difficulty starting and that need for, I don't know, coffee or black tea or sports or whatever, or cold plunge. That's all nice and dandy, but that's actually provoked or dictated by a non-restorative sleep. So what about going upstream? What about supporting, oxygenation? What about, in my case, the surgery doesn't work very well. I used a dental device. It worked, and it created all sort of tensions in my body. So it changed structure. I said, no, I'd rather actually get used to, a mask and mouth taping and ionizing my bedroom and choosing a special mattress. So the whole ecology of sleep changed. And then I realized if I work on sleep upstream with IHHD and with oxygenation at night, it will then have and it might actually have and it did. It changed my blood markers. It changed the, various markers that I had tested, even in my thyroid. So it changed a lot of the picture. And you realize that when you truly detoxify at night and repair deeply, your need for food, your need for external aid, regardless of what that aid is, changes or reduces dramatically. And you become much more self-sufficient and much more connected in some ways to nature and to the basic foundational pillars of life, which don't require external aid. At least that's my understanding now, which might have all. I hope this.
Well, the mitochondria, I think when we see the epidemic of chronic disease, for instance, that North America, well, in the U.S. that we've exported all over the world now, but that starts with, right? That damages that. I think in my opinion of lifestyle habits, what we're seeing is the effect of oxidized mitochondria or damaged mitochondria, which aren't creating energy. And that's using oxygen effectively to create ATP, which is what you're talking about. And so if we can't create enough energy, we're not going to sleep as well. And there's lots of, like you're saying, and we're not going to effectively create energy, and we're going to want to eat more energy, which is going to affect our eating habits, as you're saying, our energy output. And there's plenty of recent, I think, research in connecting basically certain types of forms of mental, I won't say illness, but, things where mental struggles with mitochondrial health. So, or insulin resistance and so forth. But when you, as you're saying, you're going right to the root of mitochondria, which creates energy, which then affects every other part of our life, and health. That really is root cause health. That really is root cause medicine by re-stimulating. So let's talk a little bit about how that impacts the mitochondria. Because what I heard you say, I just want to kind of recap a little bit, is it takes you from sea level up to about, let's say for the U.S., you said 6,500 meters, 19,000 feet, 20,000 feet. So like going to the top of Kilimanjaro, essentially, or something like that.
Everest, Kilimanjaro.
Yeah. And then bringing you back down, up and down. So that's creating a pressure from CO2.
It's activating, thank you very much. So what it's doing is it's reigniting a process that happens in all of us in utero when we're in the womb, which is we actually, the whole ebb and flow, sea mountain happens during the process of development, during those 9 months.
Fascinating. I didn't know that.
So there must be a memory at the limbic level, and again, this is a naturopath in me speaking from an energetic standpoint. We're remembering a process that's not forgotten, that's remembered at the cellular level, at the limbic level. So, and we're increasing CO2 production. As we know, CO2 is not an enemy. It's actually a friend, and we need of it. Again, it's all, the poison is in the dose, like in everything.
Correct.
Here, it's really creating, I call it cellular surprise, which was, I have not found a better, I think, word or expression than that. And like every hormetic stress, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So a small targeted stress will enhance one's ability of adapting better, more swiftly. And that's what life is all about. And one of my teachers says, no, I also have a bit of wine and a bit of vodka, but I don't exaggerate, and I constantly surprise myself. And I think that's one thing that I perhaps have learned over, 20 years of practice, but 17 actively as a naturopath, which is surprise your gut. I used to tell my patients, surprise you. Feed different families of food, because the more you become used to certain foods, eventually the weaker you become, the moment you're hit with something you don't know. We all know that. But it's variety. It's like everything in life, variety, in our interactions, variety in the music, variety in the food. And that's what really makes it, I think, we become more resilient to change the more families of bacteria are fed, through change, proper mastication. Same thing here. It's that shock. So you go up, and let me move a little bit more specific. And there's a range of, 10%, depending on the devices, 10% at 17% oxygen. So we create a hypoxic state. So that, of course, is often harder to breathe, but we do it very gently. So the body has to adapt to being, at the top of Matterhorn or Kilimanjaro, as you said. So it's an effort. So we're training, but while we're resting. And then we're brought down. But the training is not just by being there. It's a surprise. It's when more oxygen comes in. And then we're surprised by the volume of air. In my case, it was much harder when I came down than when I was up. Some people feel that. I was like surprised to receive that air, and my brain was trying to adapt. So, and it's by that, it's that window of surprise, sea level, sea mountain, that creates then the shift inside of mitochondria, but also speaks as stem cell upstream. So it's actually the beauty of IHHC is it can be used as a standalone therapy, which is what I want to do with these executive breathing longevity lounges offered to, type A personalities, people working hard. But then I also want to be able at some point maybe to bring it, I'll be allowed to in certain schools or offer it, for people who are neurodivergent and, who are looking for alternatives to Adderall and Ritalin, amphetamine derivatives, and who are looking because we know it's still very difficult for a lot of people, especially for single mothers or, families with, one family members raising kids, in less privileged contexts to change their diet. It's expensive. And my idea is to actually be able to bring this, and it takes time because you have to fix also the absorption. So it's complicated. And the idea here is that people can understand that there's an effective way of training, but not only because by training the mitochondria, you're training the brain.
Yes.
You're training the different biomes. So you're really working in a holistic manner, which is what I love. The way you are when you eat foods that resonate with you, and did you take the time to eat them, and you masticate well, and you're able to metabolize them, but no one truly knows if we're able to metabolize it. And as we get older, we know that there are more and more errors. Enzymes go to sleep, etc. So the beauty of our work, Zane, is to be able to reactivate sleeping enzymes, by using, turmeric extracts, and there are ways now of targeting. But again, it requires walking around with 15 supplements, and maybe we don't need as many. It's a question. It's maybe a rhetorical question. I don't know. Does aging, the line between aging gracefully and disgracefully is very fine. So we either fight the aging process by, utilizing everything we can, or we approach it with not anger, but with determination, that it's something that we don't want to, or we slow down the inflammatory cascade, but we accept, but this is a philosophical decision. We accept the beauty that comes with it, which is wisdom, because everything happens for a reason. And as certain hormones are depleted, if they're not depleted at too great a speed. Other hormones kick in, such as estrogen. I mean,
Right.
it's a very subtle concerto, but that allows us to become, grandparents, or that allows us to become milder, to look at things with more philosophy versus being hunters. So it really depends. It's a decision. I think that what's interesting, and again, I come back to the former Soviet outlook, is hormones, as you know, stem essentially from, Eugene Hertog and the Belgian school. That's where really it all began, the BHRT movement, and then penetrated the US, and now it's of course done in different parts of the world. But again, it's a Western emergence. It's a Western outlook on the aging process.
Correct.
Whereas the Soviet approach,
to extend youth.
And extending youth is essentially extending what we remember of our teenagers and keeping those hormones at a youthful. Now, you can do it, as you know, through peptides, and you can do it through herbs and through sleep. But there's only that much you can achieve. If you really want to go back as you get older to when you're 20, and I'd like to believe that one of the most powerful, gentle, truly regenerative ways is actually by constantly supporting your mitochondria, which again, to my mind's eye, is not just by breathing and going up and down. Look, if you take the Swiss mountaineers, some of the healthiest people are walking. They're walking up and down the mountains with these feux de phoque in French. They're not, killing themselves in marathon. It really is. I'm saying that's a choice, because as you know, elite athletes are often as inflamed as stage 4 cancer patients, as one of my teachers. Yeah. They're run down. The problem is this: they're fed with so many molecules of happiness that they're convinced, and they're dogmatic the way people are in religion or in food. And that's the hardest part. Getting people to understand that, like, treating vegans, as you know, or treating anyone as extreme. It's finding that middle ground. The hardest thing is to be in the middle, to enjoy, to integrate vices and exceptions in that mix, and not being either this or that, but being somewhere in the middle. It's very hard. Right. I'm still perfect.
Well, we all are, right? We're trying to find the homeostasis.
Next time I'll be asking you questions, Zane, because I want to find out about your secrets and how you look at it. But it's
I think it's learning. It's like you said, being intellectually curious and intellectually humble, being willing to look at what you're doing and say, this isn't working, despite the fact that I've tried to tell everyone that it does. And then I've tried to force it upon myself. And when you hit something that says it was a person you're helping or yourself, and you realize this is not effective in the way that I believed it once was, what's next? Do I keep trying to pound this and do it harder, which is what a lot of people do? Do I diet harder? Do I exercise harder? Do I do the thing with just more, like I'm not doing it enough? Or is it that this does not have the corrective impact that I assumed it did? I need to look elsewhere for these answers and realize that we should constantly be looking for new answers. And we should constantly be ready to realize we understand part of a truth, but the rest of the truth comes through experience and through trial and error. And I think that's what took you here. That's what's corrected me on many of my 26 years of dietary, seeking for the answer to correcting metabolic health. Right. And so what you're saying speaks so loudly to me with correcting going back to the mitochondria. How do we heal mitochondria, allow them to regenerate, because they're constantly regenerating? How do they regenerate better rather than worse?
Something I want to share with you. I started discovering the benefits of red light, which photobiomodulation also comes from the former Soviet Union in its research. A friend of mine in the States has a beautiful company where he creates a system of glow with no LEDs. And so in other words, he has a sauna, actually. The Center Wellness has it. I have a glow. And what I've done now is that I use it in the morning and at night. And I'm very, very sensitive to my dreams. I'm very interested in how I sleep. I've broken down. I just have a handful of supplements I take before I go to bed, really. So I use IHT, I use my mask logically, but when my dreams are different and when I wake up smiling under my mask with more vitality than the night before, I know something's working. And the ionization of the air is very important. We don't talk enough. The Australians use it, in hospitals too, with the medical iodine, which I find fascinating. I don't know. Do you use that? Are you interested also in the ionization of the air? It's a basic mattress.
I haven't dug into that, no.
It's everything from, the mattress, from, sleeping alone or sleeping with the right person. I mean, there's some studies showing that, we're not really meant to sleep. Yes, we are meant to exchange with someone we love, But the actual sleeping process is a very mysterious one, and we have different ways of sleeping. And I often wonder whether we shouldn't each have our own room and have our room.
Right.
Let's see if we can,
The jungle room. Right. So sweet.
that's what I mean. So the sleeping is really important. See that in hotels. We're still not able to personalize, the sleeping experience in hotels, which is something I'd love to be able to experience, which is choosing the mattress, choosing the pillows, choosing the linen, but going really into the nitty-gritty in advance. The way we can choose the suite category, the room category, we'll choose the quality of the mattress and, okay, but
Right.
the red light. So in the longevity brick and mortar experience, I was speaking about the weighted blanket, the breathing, the music, the frequency medicine. I'm also using red light. I am not a great believer in overstacking because then it becomes, it's not too good to be true. It becomes too much. I went to certain trainings in Germany where the chair was massaging me. I said, please, let's stop this. I can't relax. The whole point is to enter the parasympathetic. It's not to remain activated with a massage chair. So, and we know now, methyl blue, people are, looking at ways and all these ways work. What I find interesting with IHHT is you're encouraging people to actually nap the way certain cultures do, to enter that even in the morning. And most of us fall asleep. And it's fascinating to watch type A personalities. We have some too in Switzerland and in Europe, of course, maybe, differently driven than in the US, but we still do. And the moment you get the dose right, a hypoxic dose, there's a moment where they let go. And then they go, hold on, I don't know whether I was asleep or not, but I felt something, or I felt much calmer. There's something else. The serenity, the distance, the distance vis-a-vis not only yourself, but situation, loved one. So all of a sudden you have like an orange light that appears. You become less impulsive. So it's clearly feeding, it's oxygenating you. It's improving microcirculation. Some report, better libido, male, women, because it improves microcirculation to the extremities. If you have better blood flow, it flows both ways.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's
NO2 production, all those things are connected, I would think.
very much so, and connected with, you see, with the cycle. We have cycles too, but women will say, my cycle was less painful. But it takes a 10 to 15 session, and it's cumulative. And then you do,
of course,
you will, people tend to feel a difference after 3 to 5, but I encourage them to, if they can
10 to 15,
invest the time and the effort. And the idea is really that they eventually understand how important it is to have that at home, the way they have a red light.
And how would they sustain, let's say that someone did 3 to 5 sessions a week for, say, 6 weeks?
I would say 3, 5 is too much. Unless they really don't have the time the way I did.
3 sessions a week for 4, 5, 6 weeks. And they're going to see the significant change.
It's 5 weeks.
How would they sustain that? Do they sustain that with the same pattern, or would it be something a little less, like once a week? Or
no, I would do it. I would weight it off gradually, like the dexamethasone. I would start with 3, and then I would move to 2 for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'd assess them again. So I'd run it for 15. Question that before, after. And then I'd run it for maybe, it depends. Again, it varies. If someone is coming and is slightly suboptimal, I would, maybe even encourage them to stop for a month and see how they feel. No strings attached. Some people will stop for a few weeks and go, you know what? I still feel fine, but I'd like to come back. And they'll come back twice a week for maybe a month. That's another 8 sessions. When they reach about 20, 25, there's a very high chance that people will want one at home. Or they'll get a monthly membership.
And then maybe it's like a once or twice a week kind of thing.
Twice a week. I maintain
to maintain.
I don't do it every day. I do it twice a week. Then I stop for a month. I play around with it. But I know that if I'm training to swim better, or if I just want to be even more, it's not even about physical health. It's also about mental health. So this is a very interesting therapy that could be deployed in the mental health space, in the field of psychiatry, psychology, to help patients open up before therapy. It could be also used, and this hasn't been done yet, and this is one of my wishes in the US, is to bring it in North America, to bring it into the beauty from within sphere prior to operations, interventions, fillers, injections. If the mitochondria are healthier, you're going to repair faster. I mean, everything's going to work.
Recovery and repair are the same.
Recovery and
same
repair.
Source.
Same source.
Yeah. It's the same source, whether it's exercise or it's an intervention or more. And so it's like, it goes back to your integrative approach that you were talking about before, where it's like
potentializing.
You were either the naturopath or allopath, and it's like, no, we need to integrate. We integrate our approaches as appropriate for the individual
at a given moment in time.
Exactly.
That really is the key, because you might not need, and when I see many people in my field, oh no, I'm totally against allopathy. Well, allopathy can save you in certain situations. I mean, you have to have the humility to And it's a mysterious here ebb and flow between our toolbox as practitioners, doctors, meeting a belief system of a patient at a moment in time. I wasn't ready for dexamethasone when I had the COVID on 19th of March 2021 in Moscow, but I was ready 3 weeks later because I literally felt that I was succumbing to that force. I don't know what it was, but something was coming after me to teach me. It was a message. I took it as a message. I took that ordeal as a gift.
Sure.
And it's very interesting because in Germany, let's talk about Germany for a second. It's all over them. It's growing, growing, growing. And practitioners. So we currently have a device that's stored in my fulfillment company in Utah. We have a couple of devices in Miami, as I mentioned. We have one in Sarasota at colleagues of mine. We have one at a chiropractor, naturopath. We have it at an MD's office in Beverly Hills in LA. We're going to have it in Palm Springs in 3 weeks. We're going to have it with you very soon. So the idea is to allow for people, hopefully, to have different people to be able to experience it. And then we're also going to have a second device. So there are going to be 2 devices early next year. Yes, I didn't tell you this. This is a premiere, but we're going to have a second device, which will be a B2B device for practitioners. So I'm going to be dividing the market into the B2C end user device. And there's going to be a B2B one with several tests with an ECG inside it. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah, there are going to be certain tests that can be done, an HRV test integrated, a user-friendly dynamic HRV. So there's going to be a few tests that are going to be done in the device, in the medical device.
So you get direct feedback
Correct.
while they're
Correct.
experiencing the treatment
And
on HRV and EKG and so forth.
Yes.
Or ECG, excuse me.
Yes, ECG.
So yeah, that's one thing you had mentioned to me. We haven't even discussed is the impact, but we mentioned sleep, but the impact on HRV, which would tie directly to the parasympathetic stimulation.
I should have mentioned that the most people have their rings and devices, but we also test HRV before and after 15 sessions, and it does have an impact on HRV, which is very, very interesting for health enthusiasts, but also for practitioners. So I mean,
recovery and sleep. I mean, I can tell you most of my so I have a lot of very healthy clients, like healthy focused clients.
Okay,
they're high driving, like you're talking about. They're not going to slow down. They're not going to. They don't want to slow down, right? They want to keep their career is very important to them. Their business is very important to them. Performing at a high level is very important to them, even 40, 60, whatever. But sleep is that one thing they can't do hard. Like you can't, you don't do sleep like you do exercise. It's very much it is impacted by what you do during the day, but the parasympathetic is overrun by the sympathetic. And I can confess this in my own life and where it starts impacting sleep. And that is like that's their Achilles heel is sleep. They can do everything else well. They're very fit, very healthy, good habits, very disciplined, consistent, but sleep. And so it's to stimulating the parasympathetic and improving mitochondrial health to make sleep a much more productive time is.
I agree.
I mean, that is.
I
think that's a missing element in so many people's.
100%. Look, for years,
in healthy people's,
people
protocol.
I see, loved ones, friends, socially, let alone patients, don't have restorative sleep. A handful of them have apnea.
Right.
Many have hypopnea. So they have problems. So short, a lack of oxygen. A lack of oxygen going to the brain night in and night out over a few decades. There are changes, structural and functional changes to the brain. I mean, Dale Bredesen doing, mind-boggling work on Alzheimer's says that among the array of causes undergirding Alzheimer's, one of them is night hypoxia, prolonged hypoxia at night. And most people don't. I mean, we end up because look, it's a ripple effect. Poor sleep, it's a chicken and the egg, will have an effect on hormones, namely on low thyroid.
Yeah.
As melatonin and hormones drop, low thyroid will likewise, it's a bidirectional path. There's going to be worse blood flow to the extremities.
Less energy production.
And less energy production, poor mitochondria, of course. Low thyroid generally comes, as I mentioned, with low melatonin, low thyroid. Insulin goes up, estrogen goes up, the androgenic hormones drop. We put on extra fat, et cetera, et cetera. And these things, growth hormone drops, of course.
Yeah.
And the restoration becomes more and more difficult. And then we have, of course, external factors, our personal lives, our work, electromagnetic pollution, traveling, which is my case, which I'm not, but I've noticed that, and of course, I mean, chronologically in my past, my mid-40s, and the beauty of using a CPAP is allowing me, to move backwards and forwards and still feel relatively on top of things without suffering days of jet lag, which would be much harder. So the recuperation improves.
Yeah.
And that's really what I think a very beautiful hack. And I'm ready to bet that in the next decade or maybe even less, as they become smaller and less noisy, which is the case now. I mean, the German CPAP that I own by Löwenstein, family-run business, it's not as famous as ResMed or Philips, but it actually is absolutely makes no noise. So I'm bound to complain anymore. It's fast, you just put it on. And it's very interesting because the science of sleep is still very young. We talk about it with my medical practitioner who follows me and follows my improvements, and she's surprised. And the whole topic of neurodivergence in the US, and not just in the US, and ADD and ADHD.
ADD, yeah.
It's a huge thing. I mean, I know it from my own experience. And if you tackle it from a different angle, but through the lens of sleep and sleep optimization, I mean, and of course that means mitochondrial support. So IHT during the day, you can get every lazy, hyperactive child and teen and adult to lie there, even if they can't get into that parasympathetic quickly. There's a moment when that dose kicks in and they go in, and that much goes a long way.
Much easier than over 40, over 50-year-old executives with ADD and ADHD.
We could run a study together.
Who are taking Adderall and to keep focus on their work. And that is not to be a judgment. I don't say that as a judgment. I say that as a very real, this is what they have to do to continue to be productive. And they think it's being so attributed to wiring or being innate, whether there is a way to help there. Well, there may be some of that,
yes,
hypervigilant or, but there's a way to help correct that with sleep. And maybe they can manage that hypervigilance
100%.
without the Adderall, if they're getting better sleep and have improved mitochondrial function.
As you know, once again, to come back to Russia, Adderall, the equivalents to Adderall are banned. You cannot use them. They just don't exist. It's a toxic. So they use.
Well, they don't it's a Nazi
Max
derived drug, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
So that would imagine they let's just keep all that.
No, it's true.
No, listen.
The outlook is C-max acetate. Let's use a nasal spray. Just go down the peptide route. That's what they use.
Yeah.
And actually, in Russia, they don't even, in that sense, they don't categorize the way we do and label. There's a good thing to labeling in the West and then addressing. And there's maybe we over-label and over-medicate and over-treat even with supplements. Whereas in Russia, the person is, active. So there's room for being hyperactive and having 5 projects at once and not finishing many. So it's a different rapport to
Sure.
But again, I think that definitely addressing sleep and mitochondrial health at the root is primordial. And the roles, I mean, I've seen the effect on because as you get older and hormones drop, depression creeps in, and often, hyperactivity comes with a certain form of bipolarity as well. And a lot of that is microcirculation beyond trauma. Beyond our personal stories that we think.
No, I think there's a link to mitochondrial health as well not as me philosophizing on my own, but from research that linking mitochondrial health with things like bipolar and depression and so forth.
There is
even schizophrenia with a mitochondrial component.
Because as we know, and Gerson's work and on the second brain, the beautiful book came out in 1996. He was from Columbia University. He still is. Now he's an elderly gentleman, and he was frowned upon in the mid-90s. And now there's a department of neurogastroenterology at Columbia University that addresses namely schizophrenia and others through the prism of the biome and the gut, etc. Now, if, as we know, IHT works upstream, it's working on every biome and also the gut. So it's fair to assume, it's just pure logic that and as we know, that there's a huge gap also between the discoveries and what comes out in the research. And this is where functional regenerative medicine make a lot of sense because it takes, and that's really what's charming. I use, this term about the whole biohacking space is that a lot of the devices and approaches that are put forward are essentially, people are coming from a place of pain. People are coming from a place of experience, a loved one, themselves, a child, you name it, a spouse. And a lot of that is hasn't yet spilled into the conventional mainstream medicine
Mm-mm.
for reasons that many of us know. But the beauty is, so it's interesting to be able to pick and choose without being too technocratic and too toy friendly, because a lot of it is gadgets and gimmicks, when in fact you can go back to basics
Right.
and then bring in some of it. But it's
Healing
fascinating.
is not just, it's not just physical. It's not just emotional.
No.
So, and I think addressing both is, like you said, integrative in all things. This is, I think I want to make sure there was something else I want to ask you about. I know that we covered the CO2 impact on the mitochondria.
Sorry, we're talking about trauma. One important thing, since the ebb and flow, sea mountain is an experience that we all go through in utero, where we, of course, inherit trauma. As we know, the mother's womb is, everything passes through it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's a reservoir that passes on tangible molecules, nutrients, benefits, toxins, trauma. The mitochondria are passed on, and we're inheriting mitochondria with memories. So we're inheriting trauma as well, let alone our own trauma throughout our life, but also what's passed on. So the beauty, perhaps I'm conjecturing here that, through music, we can then rewire the way the language and the alphabet takes place, because we know there's a constant flow and a constant change. And that's what I find really, really interesting, especially in combination with the music. The results have been really dramatic, the changes. Some of my colleagues now in Germany also deploying that. And the mask, thank you. And the mask, the music, and thank you very much for reminding me. I don't always do it, but I will start systematizing it, the eye mask. So in other words, people
blocking light from
blocking light, and they got the red light therapy. And inviting the person to look inward, what I call a journey into oneness. Because that really is what it is. Because the worst results that I've had, of course, limited results with patients insisting at the beginning when I open and create that concept in Switzerland to use their phone. I say, no, it's either we do it this way. Sorry, this is not the right place for you. And it's interesting. Some people say, no, but I relax this way. No, you don't. They stay constantly hypervigilant in a sympathetic state, and it doesn't work.
Right.
And it's a very interesting moment, and I really look forward to supporting you and your patients or clients with it, because the medicine is really going through a revolution right now.
I love it. Oh, I can't wait to get my hands on it and to bring it to some of my patients for their feedback, who are this type that we're talking about, but and get their feedback on it and really.
I forgot to mention a physician, a very, very interesting and very courageous friend of mine, a doctor of mine as well, who specializes in bioidentical hormones, who actually works very closely with Thierry Hertog, who you might have heard of, who's the father of, so Thierry has one of his students, friends, colleagues in Belgium by the name of Stéphane Résimond, who has a prominent practice in Belgium and lectures in France and Belgium, mainly in French-speaking countries. He who's an elite athlete as well. We just placed a device there. So we're with my business partner we've actually opened, but we're going to be going to Brussels and really helping, because he's got a different demographic of patients who have been terribly hit, by the vaccine injury and various other ailments. And of course, he's helping with hormones, lifestyle, supplements, but there are limits to all of that as well. And he understands the importance of supporting the mitochondria. So the Belgians are very open. The Belgians are very much the North Americans of Europe. That's what I've come to this.
I see.
Oh, very, very. They embrace new ideas, and they're more sort of directly connected even to the US than the Germans are. The Germans are very open, but it's a very strong economy. It's a very big country, and they've got it all in-house. It's all there. They don't really need to export what they do. The economy is self-serving, if you know what I mean. Sure. And they don't really export their message. A bit like the Russians. They don't export themselves very well. They take a lot from the Russians, they systematize it, and they do really well in Germany. Whereas the Belgians are actually very open to, they've always been open to training, but they're open to, and you see many American labs, like, Metagenics in the old days, opening a nexus in Belgium. The legislation all that. So Luxembourg and Belgium. There's also a pliability and openness in the people, which is very refreshing. For someone like me who's quite open. Yeah. It's
amazing. Well, I want to make sure I don't want to neglect something. You sent me several studies, and we need to get into the studies, but just to hit the highlights of there has been a lot of research and studies into this. You mentioned a little bit of it with
Alzheimer's.
I saw Parkinson's, neuroplasticity with elderly patients, exercise tolerance, increased exercise tolerance, which is very important. So that obviously that means they're having more energy and recovery is improved.
And also for the cardiovascular, Zane, there's a lot of work. Research showing the elasticity of the vessels. So yeah. And as you know,
so that's NO2 as well as, I would guess, recovery and healing.
nitric oxide, CO2.
Plaque.
Correct.
Which is, the number one killer of men is cardiovascular disease. So if you correct NO2, blood pressure, and plaque, and the expansion and contraction of the blood vessels as they're supposed to, which is also connected to sympathetic, parasympathetic.
Right. Of course, the counter argument that I hear is, but Karim, all this is wonderful, but the Russians don't live that long. My response to that is, yes, because there's so much stress in the society, from wars, famine, the ecology, which is, can be, dramatically improved. So I'm just saying too many stress is also not good. They discover wonderful things, but then you of course need the context. This gentleman who's 101 is living here in the mountains, with a perfect ecology, and he's moving around and he's developing his brain. So there's of course a context with it.
Sure. But these are research where they were looking at improvements in actual people. So a mitochondrial improvement tied to each of these. Yeah.
Cardiovascular, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, athletes, autism. Now, this is very important. Autism or autism spectrum disorder. In Russia, I repeat, currently, as we speak today, Zane, I'll be seeing it hopefully next week. There's a clinic. They understand autism and they regard it as a mitochondrial disease. Now,
interesting.
Yeah. Maybe they're less, and definitely less on top of the heavy metal toxicity angle and the epigenetic angles we are in the West and in North America, but they understand it through the binoculars or the lens of the mitochondria. So maybe the takeaway from this beautiful chat with you today is the mitochondria should really become the new viewfinder through which we understand our own health and the health of our patients.
Absolutely. It's the beginning of health.
It really, for example, yesterday I misevaluated the snow here, coming straight from that. I came with a suitcase with wheels, which was ridiculous. I was actually warned, but I still wanted to be, pig-headed, and came up with, and I had 25 minutes coming up this way, and it was tricky. But what was interesting, when I reached here, and it's that thing, and I see this here. The people are very, very healthy in Switzerland and in Austria because they walk up and down, and what the Soviets
intermittent or interval training there with your hypoxia, right?
And what the Soviets understood is, hey, you can't take someone in real time from Kilimanjaro down to Miami. But if we create that surprise, there's a shock and the body has to become even faster at adapting. And I think that really is the beauty of expanding that comfort zone or getting out of that expansion. It's essentially adapting. And that's why I think a lot of the beautiful research on adaptogens were conducted by Lazarev and his team Breckman after World War II, where during the Cold War, the Americans were taking the athletes, the military, the astronauts, and so were the Soviets, and the Americans were giving amphetamines to boost their performance. Remember, we're talking about performance. We're still in that mindset. More is better. More is better. Harder is better. Make it harder. Get tougher. Lift more weight. Yes. Up to a point. And then the Soviets, and I'll finish here, but this is very interesting. Lazarev started looking at a family of herbs, of plants to grow in the Siberian pristine highlands and in Kazakhstan. And he realized that those herbs, we're talking about the late 40s, early 50s, these herbs were able to withstand a Siberian winter of back then. Now, Siberian winter back then was minus 40, 50 Celsius average. Celsius, not Fahrenheit. So he posited that, he first observed that these herbs were able to survive the winter into the spring and summer. And then he then started studying them and realized that, if Mother Nature is so well organized that these plants can survive our winters, what happens if I give them to the astronauts, to the military, to the athletes, the elite? And this is very interesting, discovered that these herbs that were non-specific, as I was mentioned earlier, in other words, they spoke straight to the hypothalamus, not to specific glands, so they went upstream, were able to pass on not only properties that are tangible, so molecularly sort of, pharmacokinetic properties that are tangible, measurable is the word, but they're able, and this is when it becomes exciting, the herbs were able to pass on their emotional intelligence, their energy, if you will, to our cells, but more importantly, the experience and the fear of death. and their survival instinct and their resilience. So they passed on a life story and maybe even a near-death experience to our human cells, the cells of these three groups, the astronauts, the military, and the athlete, changing the terrain in those groups, making us then more resilient to stress, which doesn't become distress. And this goes back to Hans Sey as well. Those same herbs just, grow in China, but the results are not the same because the environment, the biotope is different. So their experience in China is different, the climate. So in other words, it's not just about what you measure and are able to dose. It's actually about the context, what we call energy, which I find very, very interesting because it shows you that even eating, you can even apply that to food. You eat the same dish with a different person or in a different mindset and a different context, geographical, the food will behave differently. Do you know what I mean? If you agree with that, then, but that's very exciting because it's,
Yeah. There's energy that's transferred.
It's really the energy.
Energy does not, as we know, thermodynamics does not just disappear or is wasted. It's transferred. So
it's transferred, exactly.
And so we have,
and that's what happens with music.
The energy is transferred.
How it's wrong. And that's why there's a synergy here with the red light as well. So when you bring in several modalities, you create a cocktail or concerto, which then shifts the terrain. And by the way, for those of us interested in biological medicine, I do a little bit of it with dark field microscopy. You can actually visualize changes. Now that becomes very fast. That could be a topic for another conversation, but you can actually
that'd be a large topic.
You could visualize it and then show and participate with the person. And of course, a picture pays 1,000 words, but when you actually show the person what's going on in their terrain, they become more cognizant of the importance of partaking actively in that change and in their health being their own creation.
Well, of course, the belief system within
change
would certainly play a part. Embracing.
Again, we're working in the grays. I mean, it's not a perfect science; it's an art.
No, but I think you have enough science.
But there's
with this device to show progress, and then creating a better environment obviously adds to the but I think
very
there's
much
something to be understood. I love the integration of other therapies with that while you're there, while you're relaxing, red light, music, turning off.
You can also put on a PMF mat. Many of my colleagues use a PMF mat in Germany, which is a great stack, a great addition. I've kept it sort of, but I could also add a PMF mat there, but I would start there.
At a lower, like something subtle where it's not stimulating, right?
Correct.
Just enough to.
That's exactly right. Something subtle. It's really the subtlety and the elegance, and also the care, the cocooning, because a lot of it you then take on at home when you purchase a device or lease it, and there's that cocooning, the herbal tea. People come for that experience, and that also contributes very much so to the healing.
May I ask you one? I asked you one question. I realized what it was, and I don't want to take your.
No, my pleasure.
You've been so generous with your time, but
there's
going to be a lot of questions about this compared to HBOT, and you mentioned you use HBOT off and on with it, which is obviously more oxygen coming in to the body, and this is fluctuating carbon dioxide and reducing oxygen, and so maybe help people understand.
Of course, this is
the
cellular
difference
training.
And why the
this is cellular. Sorry,
go ahead. I'll let you go.
You
know where I'm coming from.
No, exactly. And this is very important. This and also EWOT, people are asking me a lot about. So let's start with HBOT. HBOT has an array of virtues, as we know, but HBOT is not training per se. HBOT is coming in, increasing pressure, delivering, high oxygen, and it does the trick. But too much oxygen, as we know, comes with an array of side effects, potential free radicals, etc. So, to my mind's eye, to the eyes of many of my colleagues, it can be used and should be used for specific treatments, or it could be used in cycles with IHHT, but it cannot really be used. It isn't as effective, seemingly, on the mitochondria as IHT or IHHT is. In other words, IHHT is really cellular surprise, ongoing hormesis. Because remember, a lot of the research on HBOT is one of the most surprising results with HBOT is when you come out of the chamber, when you reach the 21%. So that's cellular surprise. When you come out of it, that's when you've got the hormetic stress. with HHG, you're getting it every time you go up and every time you come down. So if you look at a session with 5 cycles, a cycle being, the number of minutes spent in the mountains, number of minutes spent by the sea, you're looking at, several cellular surprises. So we're talking about a cellular gymnastic and the activation of the parasympathetic system. This is very important. You don't get that parasympathetic effect in the HBOT as you generally do. You also have a whole demographics with people who are anxious, who can't be in an HBOT. So you're much more limited with an HBOT. I think the two, again, I'm not, of the belief that it's one or the other. I think that if you're looking at a therapeutic protocol to help someone come out of, a tunnel, the combination of the two, the Russians were using both during when the COVID was at its peak, during the first and the second wave. But when it comes to metabolic or mitochondrial training or regenerative medicine, IHHC is proving to be and has proven to be for several decades to be a much safer, global, non-invasive therapy where you're measuring the stresses very gently. And it's essentially a cellular gymnastic, which is a rejuvenating one, which you can use, which can be used by more people longer, which we've said.
Right.
And that EWOT, essentially, it's the old fashion of training with a mask, and pushing yourself, training at high altitude. Question that came up, in our show in Vegas at A4M. And here again, this is exactly this is the opposite of what we want to do. We want to get people to actually relax and train while they rest, which is really live high, train low, not train high. It's a different, you see, it's.
Yeah. One thing where you're creating stress, hypoxic state under exercise stress versus hypoxic state in a
again,
restorative.
Has its virtues too, but again, this is something that can be really deployed.
You can overtrain it. You can completely overtrain a person. If someone is already metabolically challenged.
That's the whole point. And most people are metabolically challenged. And
the majority, if you just walk around the US, you'll see them every 80% of the population.
And if you can from Europe, the food is wrong. Everything, even the organic food. I mean, the soil is wrong. You can sense it through digestion. Something is not right. And I really hope that with the changes.
Many things are not right.
Many things are right. But many things are wonderful too. So it's just that you can't get the Cretan diet. It's something that I learned in my various travels. Take Crimea, for example, and, in parts of the Ukraine that have, parts of southern Russia that have the black earth. When you go there.
Soil in Europe.
Well, you eat very little and it goes much further. Come to the US and you realize that the food has no life to it, no vitality, except certain areas like Oregon and that parts that really have really surprised me. But there's permaculture. But the truth is that a lot of it comes from that. A lot of it comes from.
We're farming in dirt instead of soil. We're farming in depleted soils. We're desertification of our farmland.
Exactly.
And that's, And so that's
why. And also downstream, you have, of course, more errors in the mitochondria too. So it's.
A lack of nutrients and a lot of energy. And when you don't get the nutrients, you don't have.
Correct.
You want to eat more. So you just it's low quality, high quantity. Basically, is about as simple as you can go. But I think we're throwing toxins into our food system that did not exist even 150 years ago, and that's impacting our mitochondria, and that's why we're seeing the mitochondrial
and brain health brain health
and brain health. What it's all
it's all connected. Exactly. That's
It's the mitochondria. It comes back to the mitochondria, which is our only reason for using oxygen and our only source of real energy, really. And if that's
hydrogen, for example, hydrogen water, and the work coming out of Japan is also just supporting the mitochondria. So it's getting it from different angles, approaching it from different, it's getting the cap from different angles, and that's why
I love this. But a very passive treatment to heal that isn't
to build health.
Build health that is a training, but it doesn't. But is not. You're not going to overtrain it. You're not going to. It's a training of the mitochondria. It's not an overexertion of the body.
Correct. It's not overexertion, and it's a self-discovery, and it's learning how to let go, and it's learning how to enter that state. And that is an incredible learning curve. The way people now are entering mindfulness and looking at Dispenza's work, etc. And this is something where you can be. You just need to grant yourself 40 to 45 minutes 3 times a week that window where you switch off, you commit to yourself and you journey into oneness. And that really, and you can just, and the results are very noticeable really quickly. And that's what, fascinating. And you don't have to be as compromised as I was 3 years ago. I have people who are suboptimal who say, it's odd, I feel more energized, I feel more vital. And then of course the positive ripple effect on sleep and then the effect on the hormones. So you could have people wanting to take fewer meds, fewer hormones, fewer supplements, and eventually they're guided by a new compass. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then the results will show, and even the doctors will have to admit that change is needed. So it's very interesting. I come back to this notion of terrain medicine, which I find beautiful, and that's why I got into natural.
Yeah. You're right. You're back to root cause. You're back to root cause. And you're back to the thing that's in every cell. Yeah. You're not just treating a segment of the body. You're treating every cell in the body. So,
see, this is what I was looking to achieve for years with the training I got in Oregon, where I said, look, before jumping into a heroic detoxification, before getting into the 4 hours of repairing the gut, raise the person's vital force. Most people don't have enough energy. So I was doing it through the HPTA axis using the wonderful Siberian and North American adaptogens, and I got very good results. But also was very much criticized for giving far too much, the way many of us do. And at least in Europe and in Russia and the Middle East, people are not very systematic and they play around with it unless they're very ill and that lost hope. And I wasn't working with that. I wasn't working with that demographic. I was working with people who were suboptimal. And I was saying, but you need, and then I was helping them change taste buds for those who did it. But it worked for a few months. They got a bit better and then they played around with it. And they really, now the truth is, I just didn't know that you could work upstream. And thank you to the COVID.
So, through adversity, we find new answers.
I can't wait to get you started because you're going to really enjoy it both personally and, with your loved ones and your clients. It really makes a difference.
Awesome. Thank you, Karim.
Thank you very much.
Sharing that. Yeah. I mean, and it's just a pleasure to speak with you, to speak with someone with your perspective and your history with helping in healing. And so that's really,
we're constantly learning, and thank you for your openness. And I will look forward to inviting you on my young podcast too, the Million Minds Mission.
Let me know. I'll be there. I love it. All right.